What is going on, guys? Welcome to Tech Savvy Buyer. So as I promised, guys, I'm doing a complete noob slash beginners slash console gamers PC building tutorial. Now this is going to take into consideration, at least this episode, we'll take into consideration that you guys already know what parts you want to use and you've pretty much got all the stuff that is ready to go, and we're just going to hop into starting to build the actual PC. However, for those of you guys who have a lot of questions on what kind of parts you should buy, should you go with like AMD or Intel, I'll make a separate video in the coming weeks or a week or so pretty soon to help you figure out what parts you should go for, what kind of build you'll have, based on those parts, and essentially just kind of pick out if you're trying to go for like a video editing build, a gaming build, what kind of gaming build, all those different questions that you guys might have. We'll come together and figure out what parts you need to get that build to go. But anyways, I'll show you guys all the different parts I picked out for this specific build. They are pretty, I guess, high-end to mid-end. What I'm trying to go for here is like a decent gaming rig, not so much focus on gaming, but more or less video editing and photo editing, and actually like a test bench. So I'm making this really for my wife, but anytime I get new parts from different companies, I want to be able to benchmark them, and so that's why I wanted to have this build versus using my own personal rig for that. So without further ado, let's jump into the build. We'll start off by looking at some of the parts and what we should start doing first. So let's take a look at that coming up. So welcome back. Here are the parts that I'm going with for this build. So as you guys can see, I'm doing a Ryzen 7 1700X build actually. I'm not going with the 2700X just because there's so much value in this, and for the price I paid, it was like 130 bucks at most for this, compared to spending literally double that to get a 2700X. You're not getting double the performance in a 2700X versus a 1700X. So it just seemed like the smarter decision to go with and pick the 1700X. But I got a 360 cooler here by Deepcool. It's the Captain 360EX. It is an RGB one, and it's white because, as you can see, the case that I picked out here. Special shout out and huge thanks to Inwin and the folks over there. Very generous, very kind people. I reached out to them in order to do a build, and they were happy enough to send me a inwin 103 case, which actually, I think it's so new at this point that I don't even know if you can purchase it off their website yet or not. Probably you can. I'll find that out, and if so, the link will be in the description below. And to add on to that, I'm going to put links in the description below for each one of the parts that you guys see here, whether it was purchased from Micro Center, Amazon, and Newegg. Some of the parts kind of came from all over the place, just depends where I got a better deal. So I've picked out some Vengeance RGB Pro RAM, again going with the white build, so I got the white color one. I've got 2 packs of them, 32 gigs or 16 gigs a piece. They are DDR4 3000 megahertz. Now, you don't need 32 gigs, guys. I just got a good deal, so I decided to grab them both, but that's pretty overkill. For any gamer or editor, 16 gigs is more than enough. If you're shooting 4K and editing in 4K, you might want to go with more RAM and go with 32. But we've got a 1 terabyte Samsung SSD, the 860 EVO. We have one that's an inland brand. I think this is a house brand of Micro Center. It's 480 gigs. Again, it was only 40 bucks, so I grabbed this for basically installing Windows on this and using the other one for storage. I've got some cable sleeves to make it look neat. Now this is just extension, so this isn't going to run directly to the power supply. It's just going to use the existing ones that are coming out of the power supply and essentially just changing their color by being an extension. I don't know. Probably crappy explanation, but an extension is kind of self-explanatory. For a graphics card, we're going with a Radeon RX 590. For the power supply, now I mentioned to you guys even in my live stream and in other videos, power supplies are really important. You don't want to skimp out on power supplies. Now the retail price of this guy is around 125 to 130 bucks. I caught it on sale for 50 bucks. Roseville is, it's a mediocre brand. There's definitely much better PSUs out there like Corsair or even Cooler Master for that matter. So the only reason I went with this is because I got a good deal on it, and it's 80 plus gold certified, 850 watts. It's going to be plenty power. Photon is one of their better series of power supplies, so overall I'm not worried that this is not going to be a good power supply. I think it's going to do just fine. And last but not least, we have the actual motherboard. Now this is made by ASRock. It's their killer SLI model. Again, the reason I went with this is because it's white and I'm trying to do a white themed build here, obviously. So it has all the features that we're looking for. It supports Ryzen, and of course you obviously need the same motherboard to match the processor that you get. Of course, we'll go over that in some of our other videos coming up soon in the future. So the only other thing that you guys can see here that I haven't covered are the fans. Now, These are just some fans I had laying around. This is just going to go in the case for intake and exhaust purposes. It's not going to be used on any cooler, or it's not going to be used on the CPU itself, obviously, because I have an all-in-one for that. But this is just a standard, you know, 120mm fan that you can put on the back for an exhaust. And then I took the other two that, if you guys remember in my rig, I had a Gamdius 240 cooler. Since I've changed out the cooler, I just decided that I'll use their Aeolus M1 RGB, actually ARGB fans that come with, you know, the box and all that stuff to use. That way we get some colors inside there. So without further ado, guys, let's jump into it. I'll show you the very first thing that we do. Let's do it. Okay guys, let's jump into this. So let's go over some of the tools that you're gonna need. You're gonna need a Phillips screwdriver, possibly a flathead screwdriver, just depends. If you have a smaller set of screwdrivers like the one that you see here, you can always use this as well. I've got one that's got like multiple different tools on it, different heads and whatnot, and that's pretty useful when you're trying to get into tight corners. So you can use that. You might need a box cutter to open up different boxes. Some zip ties. Put those aside. This is going to be for cable management. Now you won't necessarily need this, but I'm going to use this because the actual cooler that I have comes with a pre-applied thermal paste, which I don't want to use. I want to use my own thermal paste on it. So for that, when you want to clean it, rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol is the best thing to use to clean it with a paper towel. There's been other videos out there where people use anti-static, you know, wristbands and stuff. All I would say is make sure you just take off any metal stuff you have. I've been building PCs for about 15 years, guys, so I've never gotten an electrostatic charge or anything like that where I fried a component. Just if you're in a carpeted area and it's winter time and it's super dry and you're like rubbing your feet on the ground with socks and you build up static, that can be a problem. You don't want to do that. So just be careful when you're doing that. You don't necessarily need an anti-static wristband. See, I'm not wearing any wristbands or anything like that. We're just going to go through with it this way. Okay, so these are all the tools you're gonna need. Now let's start with the very, very first step, which is we're gonna set up our motherboard to get ready to go in the case. So let's do that. All right, so we've got our motherboard here on the table. What we're gonna do is just pop open the top of this. I'm gonna remove all the manuals aside. You won't be needing these anytime soon, at least. Not if you're watching this video correctly. Inside the box, you're going to get like an SLI bridge. This is if you're going to pair two graphics cards together to run them in SLI. This is what you need. You've got the IO shield. This goes on the back of the case and lines up with the different ports or the different peripheral connectability, like the USB ports, the Ethernet cable, audio, and all that jazz on your actual case from your motherboard. You're going to get two SATA cables used to connect your hard drives and stuff. In some cases, you'll get Wi-Fi antenna, so this motherboard does have built-in Wi-Fi. I'm not going to be using this, so I'm not even going to attach this. So but it's up to you. You can use it and attach it. I don't want to use this, so it's going to sit there. I'm going to hardwire everything here. Let's move all this stuff out the way. And let's get our motherboard. All right, now you could see they zip tied this here. I don't know if you guys can see that. I don't know why they zip tied the foam to it, but the foam is actually zip tied to the whole motherboard. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this. You guys don't need to watch that part. It's pretty stupid. I'm gonna go ahead and cut the zip ties off and we'll get back together real soon. Okay guys, so I managed to take off the foam. Pretty easy, basic stuff. And all I did was take the motherboard and set it on the actual box. This is probably the easiest way to install a CPU. And that should be the very, very first thing you do with the motherboard is you're gonna put the CPU. You do not wanna put the motherboard in the case first and then put the CPU because it's gonna be a pain in the butt to do that and you'll end up breaking something by accident. So I don't know if you guys can notice this, but there's little plastic wrapping on this. So I'm just gonna peel this off because we don't want that to stay on there accidentally and melt and damage something. And there's more over here, which I will also try and take off. Of course, having fat fingers doesn't help. All right, so this is the motherboard in its full glory, whatever you want to call it, and it's ready to get the CPU installed into the CPU socket, not bracket, socket, okay? Now, AMD motherboards will always have the brackets on the sides like this. AMD and Intel boards are different in terms of the CPU socket naturally and how they get installed and how the different coolers and stuff you're going to attach to it would actually get attached to it. So with that being said, if you look at this part here, these brackets may potentially come off during my install. It just depends on the actual cooler because each cooler you install is going to be a little bit different, and I'll show you like what the differences are and all that stuff. So it should be pretty easy. Follow along, okay guys? So we're ready to install our CPU. I got it out here. This should be pretty simple. Just take it out of the packaging, make sure you're careful with it, you don't drop it or anything like that. We're gonna take the CPU out, and I'm gonna show you guys a couple cool things here. So what's one obvious thing that you guys can notice on this chip? You can notice that right here on this corner, there is a little gold arrow. That arrow is going to match up with an arrow on the CPU socket. You do not want to put this in incorrectly, okay? And this is really easy. Like I said, this is like Lego, so do not be intimidated. This is super, super straightforward. So you see that arrow? We're going to make sure that arrow matches with this part here. And you can even see that the arrow shape around here is kind of like a square over there, and that same shape is being replicated here. These ones are all kind of sliced off on the ends, and that's the same in these cases. So you're going to match that with this part of the board. So if you guys can see the board, I'm sorry that I was covering that the whole time, but that's basically what you're going to see, how it matches. See how the design matches? That's what we're going to do. It should just fall right in pretty simply. So you're going to just gently lay it on top and the pins will go in. You don't have to force anything in. And that's it. Your CPU is installed. You're going to bring this bracket arm down and you'll feel a little bit of tension. That's okay. You just don't want to hear anything crack. That's it. Your CPU is installed. You're done with step one. You've got the CPU and the motherboard, and the motherboard is pretty much ready to go inside the case at this point. So let's go ahead and install this into the case, and I'll show you guys how we do that. Obviously, each case will be different, but that's how you go with this. Okay, guys, so I'm actually going to go a little bit handheld here, just because it was a little bit hard to navigate on how I had this all mounted, but essentially, this is the case that I picked out, right? It's the inwin 103. Now, if you look at it, I've taken off the front cover, obviously the side tempered glass cover, and I've also gone ahead and taken off the cover on the other side. You always want to do that so you have clear room to work with, nothing's in the way, you're not damaging anything, plus you get a sense of how much space you actually have to build in. Now this came with a bag of goodies, I've put that aside for now, don't need to worry about that. Now the key thing I want you guys to pay attention to here is the different slots of screw holes that you have, and these are sometimes pre-configured for certain motherboards. This is a metal chassis. If your motherboard touches this, it's gonna fry, okay? And that's a fact. You wanna make sure that they do not actually sit on this thing itself, but that they're sitting on these actual screws here. Let me see if I can show you that, but right there. And it's not focusing, there you go. So I'll show you how they line up. I just wanted to show you guys this part real quick and we'll take a look at that. So one more thing I forgot to tell you guys real quick is that this is where that IO shield is gonna get installed. You're gonna put the IO shield in first, then the motherboard is gonna go in, because that has to line up with it, okay? So it makes it a lot more easier. Remember when I told you guys, this is kind of like you're building Legos. Things just kind of fit where they're supposed to fit. If something doesn't feel like it's fitting right, you're probably doing it wrong. So just be gentle, be careful. I'll show you how to put the IO shield in there and how the motherboard lines up with that. Okay guys, so one thing I wanted to show you was how to install the IO shield. Now specific to this case, there's about, let's say like about an inch of depth in here. Usually IO shields will be completely flat with the actual case. In this case, the way inwin made this is that it's actually inside. Now it just lines up and you just push it in very gently. You don't want to bend it and it'll just snap right in place. This can be a bit of a pain in the butt at times if you don't do it correctly. So make sure that you guys put the extra effort in getting this done right, because you don't want to damage your IO shield. That's a very important part of the case. Not having one installed correctly will leave the board exposed to any kind of stuff, debris, or anything basically to come into the side and go directly on your board. So you don't want that to happen. So just make sure you install this correctly and be gentle and make sure you follow the instructions of the case on how to install your IO shield in it. Okay, so we're ready to start moving the motherboard over into the case, and as you can see how the IO shield is there, we're going to line that up with this part. Okay, now one thing I wanted to show you guys here, you see these different holes? That's where you're going to screw the motherboard into the chassis of the case. All these different holes here, that's what they're for. So you want to make sure that there's already these white, sorry about that, you want to make sure that there's already those white different pegs, I don't know what to call them, but those pegs that the motherboard actually sits on. So in the case, the way this case is configured already, it doesn't have enough. So what they'll do usually is they'll include a little bag of goodies that has all the ones that you need. Okay, and so you can use this to configure that. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then I'll show you how I position the board inside. This is pretty easy. You guys don't need to see me do this. All you're going to do is just put them in the pre-drilled slots. So it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so you guys can see I went ahead and put all of these silver ones in there. These came with it. So now that this board will fit perfectly. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys real quick. This is what it looks like once you have the motherboard installed. See how flush everything is there? It's supposed to look just like that. You don't want any kind of gaps or anything. And if you look at the motherboard itself, how I was telling you, so if you see all these different parts, let me see if I can turn up the brightness here for you guys. There we go. Okay. So all of them lined up with their screw holes. See, now we're ready to just put the screws inside and make sure that it's attached correctly. And sorry for the horrible camera angles. I have to do this by hand because I don't know how else to do this, but you could see each part of the board has the screw holes lined up. So if you look at it like that, once we get in focus here, all the screw holes are lined up, and now it's ready for us to just put in the screws and make sure everything is good. So now we've got our motherboard installed. Woohoo! So if you've gotten this far, you guys are doing excellent. Don't worry, you've got this. You've got this down, guys. So now what I'm gonna actually do here is I'm gonna go ahead and start installing the fans first. So I get that out of the way. I've got my fans here. I'm just gonna install them. Pretty basic on the back side. There's just screws that go into the hole. It's gonna sit here like that. So you can see. Again, sorry for the shaky camera there, but we wanna do this before we put the radiator in. Now, the radiator I got is a 360M. In this specific case, I cannot fit 360 anywhere else except the bottom. So it's gonna come in like this, and the pipes are gonna go around, which will block my space from doing that. So I have to do that first. And basically, the radiator is gonna be the last thing I install in this case. I'm gonna do everything else, the radiator is gonna go in last. And I'll show you guys why. I'll explain everything to you so it makes sense as we do that, so you get to actually see it. Okay, so I flipped the case on the other side so you guys can see. The fan is loose right now. I haven't installed it. I'm basically holding it by the little motor in the center so that the holes line up here, and I've already got a screw on my screwdriver ready to go, and I'm just gonna start screwing this in each side gently. You don't want to make it super tight yet because you might want some wiggle room while you install stuff around, so that'd probably be like towards the end that you're gonna want to tighten it. But you'll go ahead and just do that real quick. You guys don't need to see me do this for all 8 screws for all 2 fans on this, but that's basically the gist. So you're gonna put in all 4 screws for each one, even here, and then we'll probably go ahead and do that on the exhaust side as well. The fans are installed on all of them, and you could see how nice they have cable management here for them. So you could pass them through and they remain hidden for both of these and even for this guy. So if you see, I had passed it through here, and it's actually going to go right behind here. It's going to be, not visible to anyone there. It's going to stay hidden. I'm not using all these PCI slots, but again, it's kind of your way of how you want to do it. This is the way I'm choosing to do this, and pass it under. And you can see the cable starts to come out here because the headers for the fan are there. And I know that's kind of hard to see, so let me turn up the ISO. But there is the chassis fan headers right there. That's where that's going to plug into. All right, now that we got our fans installed, we've got the motherboard in place, we're gonna put in the power supply. And as you can see, the power supply already has markings of which cable is gonna go into which part. Now this specific case, the power supply is gonna sit in here. So that means what we gotta do is we gotta install these cables first before we put it in. That way we have space to do it and we can route the cables accordingly. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys how we install the cables here, which is pretty common sense. And then we'll just slide this in here and we'll screw it into the chassis so that everything is ready to go. So let's do that right now. So I've got all the different cables that I'm gonna need to use. One tip I would say is do not use excessive cables if you don't need to. So only use the amount of cables that you need to use. Now I'm not gonna show you how to plug all these in because like I said, it's pretty common sense, but I will for demonstration just show you one of them. So here is the motherboard cable, and it's just gonna line up. So if you see how there's a clip here, it has to line up with this part. You're just gonna pop that in until you hear a click like that, and then here goes the other one. Just simple like that. So I'm gonna finish up doing all these, and then I'm gonna put it inside the case, and I'll show you guys what we do from there. Okay, so I got all of the cables plugged in. Now we're gonna move this into the actual case right up here where it belongs. So you're literally just gonna grab it, kind of gently position it in the way it's supposed to go. And since the cables are gonna be a little bit stiff, you're gonna have to hold it and give it a little bit of support while you do this part. and just slide in. Okay. Now the whole reason we're doing that this way is because we want to make sure that this gets lined up. So once this comes into focus, you want these holes to actually line up with the holes of the power supply so you can screw it in. And in this case, like the bag, the power supply came with these little screws, so we're going to install that there. So as you guys can see, the power supply is now installed. We've got the cables in preliminary. What we're going to do now is kind of figure out how we want to route these cables that go into the headers of the motherboard and make sure that they're going the right way. So we're just going to set these aside kind of temporarily. And remember, I bought extensions, so I'm going to use that and probably get away with tucking everything inside there so that this area stays kind of neat and clean. So first things first, let's go ahead and flip this guy around so you guys can see where we have the headers located, and then based on that, it'll make sense to you when I start moving some wires around. So let me get this in view a little bit more. You could see that most of the headers are down there. Those are where the headers are. That's at least where your power button, reset, and all that kind of stuff. Well, in this case, there's no reset button. There's just a power button on this case that I can see, and we're going to put it there. And then there's also the audio ports. The HD audio is around here too. Okay. Now the USB for the front, the top of the motherboard, is these two ports here. And let me turn up the ISO so you guys can see that. But those are the two USB ports. Now that's where the thick black cable, and you guys probably think they're all black cables, but you'll see when I'm going to show you how the black cable goes in there and it fits in. So sit tight, we're going to go ahead and install those, and this should be pretty easy to follow for you guys. I'll show you guys once it's plugged in. It's, again, like I said, this is like Legos. Everything fits in a certain way. If you try to force something in that's not going in, you're doing it wrong. So it's just very straightforward. It'll only go in if it's supposed to go in. So we finally got our header cables plugged in. Now in the case of this board, in this case specifically, I don't have any HDD LED lights on this or a reset button. It's just one power button, HD audio cables, and a USB 3.0. So here's the USB 3.0 cable going from the header. There's the power button, and there is the HD audio. This guy in the middle is actually just the exhaust fan that I have. That was the closest one I could get. I'm going to neaten it up here quite a bit, but if you can tell already, this is where the radiator is going to sit, so a lot of these cables are going to get hidden anyways. So always keep in mind, while you're building, to do the best cable routing possible and keep everything as organized and neat and clean as possible. Next step is, now that we've got that done, I'm going to flip this around. I'm going to do some more cable management on the backside as much as I can, because at this point we've got the RAM left to install, the cooler left to install, the GPU left to install, but from the other side I need to make sure that we have the extension cables and everything in place. So I've gone ahead and actually installed the extension cables, and I'll show you guys how simple that really is to do, because essentially all you're really doing, let's see if I can pull it up here, but all you really are doing here is you're just taking this and plugging this into the actual outlet, and then you could see the power supply one that's coming here from the top, if you guys can see, is getting plugged into this. So it's really straightforward, it's really easy, nothing super complicated, and I'm trying to route the cables to keep this whole area clean. Sorry about the noise, guys. I've got a 2-year-old running around upstairs, so, and I'm not about to re-record all of this for that. So that is how it looks right now. I'm about ready to go ahead and start installing the RAM. Once the RAM gets installed, and I'll show you guys how to do that also. So let's actually just do that kind of live right here, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. So here's our RAM packs. Now, depending on how much RAM you use, whether you're using 2 sticks or 4 sticks, you're gonna have to put them in different slots. Now, in my example, I'm using 2 packs of 2. So I'm gonna use up all 4 slots, that way it doesn't matter. Now, for example, if you guys were only using 2 slots, this motherboard actually comes with a little instruction manual type thing here. All right, so if you see that, it's telling you A1, A2, B1, B2, and it also tells you what kind of speeds you'll get if you put the RAM sticks in which slot. So, I mean, this isn't complicated at all, guys. Don't get intimidated by stuff like this. It's really straightforward. Usually you're going to see is that you're going to put it in slot 1 and 3 or 2 and 4. That's the most common examples you'll see. So even on this page, you could see There's more support if you put it in slots A2 and B2 together if you're using dual channel RAM versus if you're just using singles, or 1 and 3 as well. When you're using two sticks, 99% of the time they're not supposed to sit next to each other. It's always going to be spaced either, like I said, 1 and 3 or 2 and 4. It's never going to sit next to each other, but in my case it will because we're using 4. So I'll show you guys how this looks when you open it up. So it's very straightforward. Just gonna pull all this out. I'll install one in front of you guys and then I'll go ahead and do the other 4 just so I don't waste your time. I'm trying to keep this video as quick as possible and as informative as possible too. I'm gonna take one stick and I'm gonna show you guys something here. So you see the RAM, it's basically this side, this whole chip side is longer than this side, okay? And that slot is actually measured on the RAM slot as well. So you want the longer one to go on the longer side and the shorter one to go on the shorter side. So if you see here, the longer side in this example is actually the top part. So all we're gonna do is just slide this in to the grooves and you're gonna push it a little bit firmly till you hear that click. You hear that? That is when you know that it's installed correctly. So I'm gonna do that for the rest of them and then I'll pick up where I leave off, okay? The next thing we're gonna do is start doing the cooler. We're gonna flip the case upside down so we can get the cooler here on the bottom and it should be pretty straightforward from there. All right, so we got all of our RAM installed in there. Hopefully the end result's gonna look super slick. Okay guys, so now it's time to install the radiator and slash cooler. Now, you guys can already see here, this is an RGB edition. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, certain coolers will come with the fans either pre-installed or they won't come pre-installed. It kind of just depends. Each brand is different. Sometimes you'll also see that they already have thermal paste pre-applied. EVGA, for example, does that, and so does Deep Cool. So, and then sometimes they don't. So I'm gonna open this and you guys can get a look at it, but, so perfect example here. The fans are separate than the actual radiator. I'm sorry, my camera resolution there is a little bit bright, super bright, but you can see, like, here's the 3 fans. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna install these 3 fans onto the radiator to make the radiator ready to go inside the case. So let's go ahead and just take these parts out. And look, as I mentioned, it's got thermal paste pre-applied. So you guys can see there's thermal paste already pre-applied on there. And they've got a plastic cover on here so you don't touch it by mistake or get anything on there, but I mean, it's a nice addition. I personally, like I said, I'm gonna use my own thermal paste here, and I guess I should have mentioned that you might need that, but it's not, like I said, 100% necessary. The other things inside here is it's including all the different brackets if you're using an AMD or if you're using an Intel. The instructions are inside too, but I'll show you guys. It's usually pretty straightforward, and most coolers are almost the same the way you install them. You get a fan hub to control all 3 fans, because of course this is an RGB edition, so it's got a whole bunch of LED lights in there. And it even comes with 2 LED strip lights that you can place inside the case with their connection cables as well. So I'll show you guys how I install all that stuff. Let's just move this box aside. So there's the fan. I want to make this like a pull. Basically, I want it to suck air out of the bottom because there's actually space for the case to do that. I don't want it to be pushing air from the case downward. So I'll usually just spin them like that and you can feel where the air is going. So this way the air is pushing down. So I'm actually gonna have to install these upside down essentially so that it's pulling air through the radiator up. I know, pretty common sense, not something you could probably look at it and get used to it. I just like doing that. Another cool thing about these fans is they're double fin. Do you see that? That looks really cool. So it's gonna do a good job. Hopefully we'll see the performance. I've heard really good things about this 360EX Captain by Deepcool. So hopefully it'll be perfectly fine. Here are the long screws that you're gonna be using. These are the long ones that go in because it has to pass through the entire thing. Okay? And especially when it's on this side, you're gonna use it like that. So we're gonna put this just gently into one of the holes, and that's pretty much it. You're gonna do that with all 3 fans. So again, I'm gonna fast forward through this or just do it myself and then I'll turn the camera back on so you guys don't waste time, okay? So I'll catch up with you guys here in a sec. All right guys, so all 3 fans are installed, as you guys can see here, and I've oriented them all in the same direction. Just did all the 4 screws. I didn't want you guys to see all the waste of time I would do there, but each one has their fan splitter cable out there. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna flip the case upside down. We're going to use these tiny screws here that I have in my hand and we're going to install this radiator. So it's really easy to do. This is probably like funnest and easiest part, I guess. I don't know. Probably not the funnest part, but it's definitely easy, so don't sweat it. You got this. Alright, so I decided instead of flipping this completely upside down to actually put it on its side, and I'll get access to the bottom here, and we can put this here. Now one thing, I'll show you a little neat trick or whatever you want to call it, but always put the screw on the screwdriver first, if you guys can see that. That way when you're holding the radiator with one hand, you'll be able to screw this in without, you know, dropping screws and stuff, because if you don't have help, it can sometimes be a pain in the ass. So you want to try and do this as much as you can. Now you want to move the cables out of the way. Since I'm bottom mounting this and my header is on the bottom, I got to be super careful that I'm not bending any cables or squeezing them or pinching them in between the radiator. So real gently, you're going to take your radiator and you're going to slide it, and be careful with the block. You don't want that to break, obviously. You're going to slide it in. Make sure there's no cables coming in the way there. And boom. Alright, now what you're going to do on the other side is you're going to line up the holes. So I've lined them up. I'm going to put my first screw in here just so that it stays a little bit put. Now I'm not going to fully tighten this, but I'm going to make sure it's secure enough so that I can go ahead and let go. And you can see it's in. None of the other cables that I have installed on there are moving around or anything like that. Alright guys, so while I was installing the radiator into the system and getting all the wiring done in the back, which again I'm going to show all of this stuff to you guys, I realized that I do have to take this out. So remember at the beginning I told you we might have to take this out? So it actually comes with its own bracket for the actual CPU holder. So you're going to have to unscrew this. There's a back plate behind the motherboard that this is screwing into, and once this comes off, just gently take them off. So there's this one and the one up here. You're going to take both of those off, and then I'll show you which one I'm installing on there. Okay, so I took it off. Here's the one that came in the box that I'm going to have to plug in. So this is going to come in from behind, and then we're going to take these and we're just going to install these on there. And again, because I got to keep the camera bright, so I'm sorry some of the stuff doesn't look awesome, but here comes off the old back plate. And when you take off the old back plate and the brackets and stuff, my advice is always to put that in the box of your motherboard. Alright guys, so we are officially ready to install the cooler on top of the CPU. Now, like I mentioned to you guys, there is already thermal paste pre-applied to this. You can see right there. I'm going to clean that off with some rubbing alcohol. This is all thermal paste, so you're going to see what it looks like once it's clean. There you go, that's better focus there. But you'll see what it looks like when it gets cleaned. Use a paper towel, and you're just going to put some rubbing alcohol on it. Don't use cotton or anything that's, you know, that can leave some kind of residue, or I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for, but lint or any of that kind of crap that gets stuck on there. So completely cleaned up. All right, now we are ready to apply thermal paste. All right, so this is the thermal paste that I'm actually going to use on there. Instead, it's called Thermal Grizzly. Usually when you guys use thermal paste, now there was a pretty controversial video out there by The Verge, I think it's since been pulled down, where the guy just, as Kyle likes to say, was icing a cake with it. That was funny. You're never supposed to use too much thermal paste. I'm going to show you how much you're really supposed to use. It's just, now people can put like a dot in the center or make like an X or whatever. I usually just stick with putting a little glob in the middle, and it's just like a teeny tiny little pea size. That is it. You don't need more than that. You absolutely do not need more than that. Once you put the cooler on it, it's going to spread it out anyways. And this is just meant for it to not completely overheat and go ape. It's supposed to spread evenly so your cooler can transfer heat, or the processor can transfer heat to the cooler more efficiently. So, ta-da, that's how you put thermal paste on. Okay, so installing this was really, really simple. You just gotta give a little bit of pressure and make sure that it's firm, and you're gonna tighten down the screws. Now, the reason I'm not going in a lot of detail of showing you how to install this cooler specifically, because chances are that most of you guys are probably not even using this cooler. You're gonna be using either like a Corsair or a Cooler Master or whatever, and each one of them have their own instructions. But for the most part, it's really easy, guys. There's tons of stuff out there on Google, there's tons of stuff out there on YouTube as well, including this, which will show you how to do it. Now, one thing I will tell you that's the same for all of them, whenever you tighten screws down, you're gonna do them alternately. You're never gonna fully tighten down one side and then the other. You always wanna make sure that you tighten down alternately. And you don't wanna over tighten either. So you wanna just do it so it's nice and snug, and that's about it. now that I've done that and it's completely done, I can go ahead and position this pipe so it's out of the way, and even the other one that's on the bottom so it's not touching anything, or maybe just bring them up a little bit here. Who knows, we can play around with that later, but there you go. There's the all-in-one cooler installed onto the CPU. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy, and I think that looks awesome already. So here's how our build is coming out so far, and it's really starting to take shape, right? Remember how it was completely empty? Now it's starting to look a lot better. Of course, we still have room to do better cable management and such as areas like that, and we'll tighten up stuff as we go along, but we want to try and get all the major stuff out of the way. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start installing the SATA cables. These are what goes to your, provide data to your hard drives. So I've got 2 hard drives, so I'm going to use both of the cables that came with the motherboard. Typically you'll get one that's like a 90-degree connector, and you'll get one that's just like plain on both ends. So we'll go ahead and install that here, and we're going to channel them down that way because that's the closest hole that we can get for it to run out of. So hopefully everything is going to continue to look nice. Now, one thing I also wanted to point out, in case I forget, but you see these are PCI slot covers. Now, when you install your graphic card, it's going to go into the PCI slot there, more than likely, and it's more than likely going to take up 2 of these slots. So when you install it, you have to take these off so that it's open, obviously. But you'd be surprised how many people do that without opening it. So we want to make sure that we do that correctly. Okay, so the next step we're going to do is install the hard drives. Now, this specific case came with these that get mounted on the back. You can mount your SSDs onto this, basically just by putting the screws on this way, going into the SSD on this side. So I've got 2 SSDs here. We'll start off with the Samsung one here first. Now, common sense will tell you want the ports to go on this side. You don't want it to be facing the screw because obviously plugs are going to go that way. So you'd be surprised, guys. People do stupid stuff sometimes. So when I say stuff like, geez, why is this guy telling us this? But see how those holes lined up right there? That's how you want to do it. So you're going to screw those in like that. It's really easy. Like I said, PC building is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's not hard at all. You just got to make sure you don't force stuff to happen if it's not happening. That's like my biggest advice to anyone. If something isn't fitting in the way it's supposed to be, like 99% probability is that you're doing it wrong. So you want to make sure that you do that correctly. Now, this is where the small screwdriver comes in handy. Okay, so we got both of our SSDs ready to mount. They both are connected to their mounting plates, and this will go on the back. It was a pain in the butt, I'm not gonna lie, because my hands are big and these screws are really tiny, so it becomes kind of, I feel like I'm disabled or something when doing this, but should be straightforward. So that's how you get those mounted. Now, alternatively, if you didn't want to do that with this specific case, here's what's pretty cool about it. You see those up there? Those are actual HDD trays right there. And you can essentially open these, slide these out, and you've got ports or room for putting in a 2.5 or a 3.5 HDD. So I thought that was pretty cool if you wanted to have front mounted. But with me, with SSDs, I kind of want them tucked in the back so that cabling, well, wouldn't make a difference so much with wiring in this case, but if I ever want to add some big hard drives, this is the only place I could do it because they can't fit on this. So these guys are going to go in the back, and if I ever do expand memory in this, it's going to go on there. Okay guys, we are ready to install the GPU at this point. I've done most of the cable management on the back. I'm not done yet. I also got the LED lights that were included with the cooler installed. Like one is going down here and one is coming up the side. I know you can't see my hand gestures here, but just thought I'd let you know. Anyway, so remember I told you you gotta take off those PCI shields, though I measured the distance, and basically we're gonna need to take off 2 of them. And you're gonna keep these screws because you're gonna use that to tighten that in. So these are the shields that I was talking about. PCI shields, you'll take those off, just 2 of them. Similar to how we installed RAM, your GPU has a PCI Express chip slot, whatever you want to call it. So as you guys can see, there's these 2 parts here that are going to line up with the board here. So if you let this camera focus eventually, there we go. Okay, so we're going to line this up here, and there's also a lock here on the bottom, this clip. If you see, you push this down and it opens. You hear that? I can lock it. you want to open that first. When the card sits in there perfectly, it's going to lock itself again. Should be able to just plop right in really easily, and there you go. It does. So there it is installed. Again, it's kind of hard to see. I'll show you guys when I lift this up so that it looks easier for you to basically manage. But this is a very compact case, which is why you'll see like where my radiator is located and where the fan of this is located. It's not ideal, honestly. I don't like how this is, but this is kind of how I have to do it right now. Okay, this is how it looks at this point. Now, that right there is not ideal. I'll be honest, guys. I don't typically build like this because I would want more space between these two here. For this and for my uses, because like my wife is not going to be doing gaming, so it's okay. But you can run your card extra or a little bit more hotter than you'd like to if it's this close. Now that is also because of the case I chose for this build is a little bit more compact. That way, you know, the airflow is a little bit constricted in here. But hopefully with all the other fans that we have and the flow we're designing, it's not going to have any heating issues. So far, I hope you guys are following along, and I hope this is making sense to all of you. All right, this is how it is complete. We're going to see the moment of truth if this bad boy powers on or not. Everything is plugged in. I'm going to turn this around and show you guys the cable management on the other side because I'm actually pretty proud of how it came out. It's not super fantastic, but given that this is a pretty compact size case, I think that the cable management actually came out pretty nice. So look at the cable management on that. It's not horrible, it's not super nice either, but it's neatly tucked away. This thing helped a lot, giving the extra space to just kind of push extra cables in there, but I zip tied everything. It looks really messy here, but honestly it could have been way worse than how it is. So I plugged it in, and guys, everything is turned on. Look at how gorgeous that looks. That looks insanely nice. We're gonna do some glory shots of this soon once I close everything up. I didn't plug this into a monitor to see if it's gonna post or not, but it turned on and it's perfectly fine, which means all of our cabling was spot on. So let's go ahead and close this up and see how it looks. Or let's see if it posts, guys. So it is a success, guys. Look at that. We posted. We're in the BIOS now. It's detecting all the memory. As you guys can see, it's detecting the processor. All the stuff is there. So we're pretty much ready to go ahead and install Windows. But that is the end of this build tutorial, guys. I hope this was helpful. And now, just pretty much the end of it is some glory shots of the build itself, because this thing is pretty sexy looking. Alright guys, that pretty much is the end of this video. I hope you guys found this build tutorial helpful. I try to differentiate myself from the way other YouTubers have done it, although they've all done stupendous jobs in showing it. So hopefully this was helpful for you. If you guys liked it, go ahead and hit that like button. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing, as it does help this channel grow. And of course, if you guys have any questions, like I mentioned before, feel free to let me know in the comments below or shoot me an email if that is more suitable. Nonetheless, it was a pleasure doing this build. I really enjoyed it. This case is awesome, I'm telling you. The cable management on this was so much easier than I've dealt with on other cases. So stay tuned for my next video. I'm gonna show you guys how to install Windows, what you're gonna need to do it, where you can pick up a Windows CD key, an original one, for a pretty good price, and as well as some other things that you should install and things that you should take a look at, such as antivirus and things like that once you get your build up and running. But until then guys, it was a pleasure as always, so I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Take care, bye.